I'm Mizuki Nishiyama, and this is SEIZA, Transgressing the Seated Body. SEIZA is a traditional Japanese seating position with legs bent, arms on the knees, and there's a sense of, pristine and traditionalism that goes with it. And with that physicality of the form, I'm exploring the constriction and also liberation of what the Japanese female population may be experiencing traditionally and also in terms of modern times. And my works, they explore a lot of trauma and anxiety that I personally went through. It's almost a visual diary of some sort, and through these very potent Japanese imagery, I make sense of my identity, I make sense of my reality and the sociopolitics that occur in the times that we live in. And I want to be able to represent the time that we live in, the modern times, and what the modern woman thinks and sees and experiences. And these collection of works, they target every single emotion, every single soulful moment, and whether it's a downfall or a thrill, it's truly an authentic journey, and that's what I hope the audience resonates with. The piece behind me is called Sitting Waiting, and just like the essence of the contrasting difference between liberation and constriction, I think the physicality, especially with the boniness of the fingers and legs twisted and folded, there's really a sense of your entire being molded and also shaped into a certain kind of frame. And essentially that's what the status quo is. And what we're trying to do is understand the world we live in with brighter eyes and a bigger heart. And the figure that sits there, to an extent, it's somewhat of a self-portrait, but with the coyness of the head cocked to the side, the feminine figure, in a way, has reclaimed the sitting position, reclaimed her status, reclaimed her gender and her sex, and things that she is allowed to do in a very liberating manner. So I feel like the piece is very inviting in a way. It's strong and sensitive and fragile, and it's exactly what I would say the female experience has been like for me. I can't seem to recite it word by word, but a poem that has really resonated with me and inspired me throughout the journey, I think just especially as a woman, are a lot of Sylvia Plath's work. Her work are extremely confessional. I would even consider my writings to be somewhat of a word salad just because of how unsophisticated how I use syntax and the way how I pair words. But Sylvia Plath, specifically her poem Lorelei, where it depicts sirens, kind of like evil mermaids that come together as sisters, and I feel like obviously they've been villainized to an extent, and with their song and togetherness as female species of some sort, they rise from the darkness, the nadir, with hair heavier than marble, and there's an extremely sensual and also liberating sense of feeling, imagining these women with hair heavier than marble within the pitch black water, following the ship and luring and trying to figure out what these men are planning to do to them. There's always a darkness within a lot of the works that I feel pulled to. And I simply just think that there always will be a sense of catharsis, a light at the end of the tunnel, if you will, and that kind of spark and intertwining of ideas is essentially what makes a concept or idea meaningful. It's what represents life, its authenticity, it's true, and there's something very, very comforting and ultimately human about it. And that's how I want my works to be depicted as well. I think essentially what any kind of art form does is that it collectivizes experiences, emotions, feelings, and in a way it's a language. And being so confused growing up, bouncing between 6 languages, I actually had some issues speaking primarily in any kind of language for a while because of how complicated and all these cultural aspects and also social orders that go with language. It's so hard to grasp, and with art it's so straightforward. It's a language of its own, it's its own syntax, its own rhythm, and I found a comfort within the pigments, the brush strokes and all that. And I guess it goes hand in hand with identity, with cultural identity, such as being Japanese. But then again, I'm not really truly Japanese either. My parents were based in France and Italy for the longest time, so they can't call themselves fully Japanese or fully Hong Kong either. And oddly enough, I've only realized I was Asian when I was in New York. And I think that kind of really sparked an interest in finding out my heritage, ancestors and all that. And being able to go back to Japan the last few months have been very, very incredible for the soul, creatively and all that. But I have noticed how my work physically looks more constraining. And that's why I guess artworks double as a visual diary, because your life experiences as an artist and what you encounter on a daily life speaks, hand in hand. There's a piece that I hold quite dear to my heart, and it's from the previous exhibition's Shunga, and it's called Funhouse. There's a lot of crazy imagery going on. There's spreading, contorting, there's the motifs of menstruating, there's pain and pleasure. And ultimately, I think that's where my research stems. It's between death and eroticism, it's between the beautiful and grotesque, and it's deeply influenced by my father's studies in French philosophy and literature. So growing up, there have been a lot of messed up stories, I guess you can say that. And I found that there's a similarity between Japanese and French values, especially between life and death. And as somebody who's experienced multiple losses, I think that it's something that's very awakening. Whether it's the trauma I felt as a woman, as a young girl, having innocence taken away, for example, I think it makes you think about what's hidden behind the shadows, because at the end of the day, there is always catharsis, like I mentioned. There's always light. And playing between that is what's sexy. That's what's fascinating. That's what's human and only organic and natural. So I think that it's probably the most important topic that goes in my head every single day. All I really expect is just to have conversations, because that's the most important thing. The only thing you can really expect. You can't control responses, and people have their own experiences to go with how they interpret things. So there really isn't much room for me, except for me to be able to tell my story in the most authentic. And whether it's neutral or not, it depends on the situation. Mine is very geared towards the mixed, Asian female experience, and still that's my own experience. So I'm always noting that, and the floor is open to interpretations. And I think understanding that Hong Kong is still somewhat of a conservative society, especially when it comes to artworks that deal with literally these kind of topics. Conversations are the most important thing because it generates that thinking process. It's not so important that there's a result right away, but for us to be aware of it, for example, in terms of mortality, we're so geared, especially in Hong Kong, historically, colonially, we have a way of thinking that's very Anglo-Saxon, and there are other ways of looking at life. And personally, I found a lot of enlightenment through that. And I'm trying to explore that through my different mediums, whether it's writing, dance, painting. And I'm trying to communicate that. And that's the fun thing, you know, you get to translate all that. You know, I've always had a fondness for languages, and in a way, this is like linguistics. You know, there's different bits and pieces of what visual arts have, elements of design, and you know, everything, texture, lines, forms. There's a sensuality to all of that, and there's a rhythm, and there's a language, and that's what it's aiming for, and that's how you generate conversation. And when people go home and they evaluate, it's stuck with them. You know, everything you touch, you see, you smell, it's part of your journey.